Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
Societal pressure, I think, is the hardest one. I think as a working parent, as a woman, as a leader, there are so many pressures out there that you probably don't even consciously process day in and day out that you're dealing with. The pressure to be a good mom to my kids, the pressure to be a good working mom for other women so they can see that it's achievable. Even the pressure as a little girl to kind of be good and behave and spoke when spoken to and to look a certain way. I think we forget just how much pressures are around us all the time.
Today, I'm talking to Lee George, Chief Operating Officer at 1848 Partners, a London-based private investment office serving families and endowments. She's worked in the global financial services industry for almost 3 decades, starting in private banking and wealth management in New York with Citibank and JP Morgan. She then moved overseas in 2006 to become Director of Global Accounts for RGP in Hong Kong, before ending up in London and M&A project management at Credit Suisse. She stepped into the COO role first at Redington in 2017, where she also served as Executive Board Director, and then 6 years later at 1848, where she is now. An ambassador for the Diversity Project, the UK's investment management industry diversity body, Lee is also an LGBT Great Ally, as well as a volunteer with Speakers for Schools, an organisation dedicated to encouraging young people to pursue careers in financial services, and also GAIN, Girls Are Investors. In our conversation, Lee shares the importance of showing the messiness of life, what she learnt when she was 5 and how that still shows up for her, and why, for Lee, it's always about the people. Lee, I am thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We're here to talk about pressure. We're here to talk about how pressure turns up for you. So let's just start there, Lee. How do you experience pressure?
I think I experience pressure from a whole host of different sources. Internal pressure, external pressure. It's kind of any stimulus, isn't it, that spurs us on. It could be negative, it could be positive, And I think the whole point of this conversation is how do you make sure you capture the positive pressure and figure out how to quiet the negative pressure. But I experience it, to me, it's a pit in my stomach, and sometimes it creeps up on me when I'm least expecting it. And I have to kind of give myself a moment to try and remember or identify what it is that's causing it so that then I address it. And sometimes I know something's going to be pressure filled, right? Before you start that, before you get up on a big panel, it's going to be a little bit, that pit in your stomach is coming. But sometimes I feel it and it takes me a while to figure out why.
So the pit in the stomach is the first sign for you?
For me, yeah, for sure.
And that pit in the stomach, have you always had that? Can you remember that being like always the first sign for you? And has the relationship with the pit in your stomach changed as you've become older?
I think I've always had it. I was I wasn't an elite athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but I was always an active kid. I was a gymnast. I felt it before any meet I ever participated in. I ran winter track in high school to keep in shape between field hockey and lacrosse. And I'd be physically sick before those meets, just because running isn't necessarily my thing. I wasn't doing it to race. I was doing it to kind of stay in good form for the next sport. But of course, you get put on teams. And I remember they kept putting me on the 4x400 relay. And oh my God, the idea of letting my teammates down just made me physically sick to my stomach. And that the people that I care about in my career, in my life, not doing what I say I'm going to do, letting them down, that will definitely, bring that pit in my stomach back. And I think, the relationship has changed because now I use that as, as something that creates positive change. And the voices or the inputs that I think are negative pressures, like, I mean, guilt's a great one, right? I don't think I can't think of a time when guilt actually brings about positive change. And so I think, thanks to my mom, who is an incredible kind of force in my life and who's always just said, guilt is a wasted emotion. I think it's not, nothing good tends to come from feeling guilt. If you want to have high performance, guilt's the way to go about instigating that.
Yeah, but I'm so intrigued as to how the pit of your stomach and the conversation about that went into guilt. So does guilt provide pressure for you? What's the relationship between pressure and guilt then for you?
I think it goes into, for me, it goes into, fear of letting the people I care about down. And feel guilty about letting people down. Right. Okay. But I mean, that's the voice I've quieted, I think, over many years of practice, and allowed kind of the other voices, to cheer me on instead.
Yeah. And also what I'm hearing in there is the sort of doing it for others or playing your part, like that, the 4x4 relay, playing that key part for the good of 3 other people, actually raises your game.
Definitely. I think, I've always chosen all of the roles that I've taken, and I've had a whole host of different roles through different career breaks that I've taken due to arrival of my kids and global relocations. I've always chosen them because of the people, the company. Yes, it's nice to be. I've worked for big brands. I've worked for small brands. I've worked for startups. I've worked for publicly traded companies. But to me, at the end of the day, I choose teams. I choose leaders. And I think when you are driven by the people with whom you work, you are driven to help, participate in a high performing team with those people.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, you've always said to me, you need to, I think you said something like, run into the eye of the storm, or run into the fire, because that's always going to be better than running away from it. And so I'm really intrigued with your journey, Lee, around how pressure has been this sort of almost attraction. I mean, on one hand, it seems to make you physically sick. And on the other hand, it's actually an attracting force, because you know that actually, if you can run into it wholeheartedly, you will be better as a result. Would that be a fair summary of some of the conversations we've had in the past?
Maybe, yeah. That pit in my stomach isn't a frequent feeling for me, though. Like, I don't want to leave the impression that that's kind of a constant. It's not. I think that's why when I do feel it, I have to connect to it and figure out what it's coming from, so that I can solve that, whatever that challenge is. Yeah. I'm an observer of people. I really like to sit back and watch and understand what the dynamic is in a room, in a meeting, among leaders, in various situations, the power dynamic, the interpersonal dynamic, and connecting with people and understanding. I mean, I think fundamentally the role of a chief operating officer is to make sure that everybody around you has the systems, the tools, the skills, the products, whatever it is, to succeed and to remove any obstacles in their way. So it's, for me, fundamentally, that is a description of what I do. And I can't do that unless I understand what motivates each of the people that I'm working with, what brings out the best in them, what maybe brings out the not so best in them. And that's all about the people and the people dynamics and how they play out over time.
Yeah. So what would you say produces pressure for you in that role now?
Um, that's an interesting question. I think, wanting to do my best for the people that I'm working with, the people that I respect the most, creating something, because I'm now kind of back at a scale up. We're all working incredibly hard in the same direction to build something, create something that has its own inherent pressure, I think. And I think that's positive pressure, because that's kind of exciting pressure. Everyone is rowing in the same direction, and we're all learning, and we're all growing, and we're all trying to build something.
Yes. And so therefore the pressure that's contagious in that group of people becomes actually very empowering, I'm hearing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And so I think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, being in a small kind of scale up, small company, you just have so much more ability to impact the direction it takes too, because, decisions are very centralized. You can be a lot more agile.
Yeah. And you've come from a bigger company, haven't you? You've made that choice to go from a bigger company to that. And it's interesting that already you're feeling that dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I think I've successively chosen smaller companies at every time. Pretty soon I'm going to be in a 5-person office. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll see. What's the worst pressure you've ever experienced, Lee?
I think it's societal pressure, I think, is the hardest one. I think as a working parent, as a woman, as a leader, there are so many pressures out there that you probably don't even consciously process day in and day out that you're dealing with. I mean, the pressure to be a good mom to my kids, the pressure to be a good working mom for other women so they can see that it's achievable. Even the pressure as a little girl to kind of be good and behave and, spoke when spoken to, and to look a certain way. I think we forget just how much pressures are around us all the time.
Yeah. And when you recognize that pressure, actually, I think you said something when we first when we spoke before this podcast, you said something that you remembered way back. Was it in primary school? To your point about what you were taught to do. Can you talk a bit about that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think you asked me if I could remember the very first time I ever felt pressure. And I was thinking a lot about that, because I know that's a question you frequently ask people. And I honestly think it was as early as kindergarten. So in the US, I was probably 5 years old. And I remember in kindergarten class, and I remember, and I'm sure it wasn't the first time, and probably happened a couple of times after that, a boy got kind of sent out of the room to go sit in the hall, or go to the principal's office. I can't remember what it was, but I remember consciously processing that event and thinking, okay, I'm supposed to be the one I'm supposed to sit here. And it happened to be a boy. And it's just these gender stereotypes that I think infiltrate your brain from such a young age. And I just remember thinking, okay, I need to be good. I need to sit and do what I'm told. I need to behave myself. I need to hand in my homework on time. I need to, sit, and I need to have neat handwriting, and I need to write the calendar in the right order, because that boy got in trouble for writing it the backwards way. I remember he had done it like a snake instead of left to right, left to left, right, left to right. And I think that was for sure the first time I ever felt pressure. And that takes a long time to shake. And that's why you and I started talking to each other, right? I did my first board position, and I sat there waiting for permission to speak, and board meeting after board meeting after board meeting would go by, and nobody gives you permission to speak in the workplace. It's your job. Goldman Sachs, I think it is, has this obligation to dissent. And I remember the first time I heard it on a podcast, I thought, oh my gosh, yes, I'm paid not to agree with everyone, not to sit there in silence, but to to provide an alternate view to whatever's being presented, not to be argumentative, but to give a different perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's such an interesting point, that whole idea of, what we're unconsciously conditioned to believe equals good behavior, and how that follows. I mean, how interesting, you're in your middle-aged, Lee, and that moment of you when you were 5 comes straight back to you in this moment of this conversation. Like, I'm so fascinated with the stuff that unconsciously sits with us. And unless we sort of dig it out, we can't track the dots in terms of what we've made that mean. Yeah. Actually. So let's go to that moment, because this is not an uncommon conversation around, sitting in a board or sitting in a high-powered environment and feeling like, how do I speak? When do I speak? How do I speak? Am I waiting for permission to speak? I don't agree with that, but can I speak? This whole idea of obligation to dissent, or just obligation to speak, right? I mean, can you just talk us through about how you moved that? Because you definitely moved that on, didn't you, massively? So what did you do? What did you train yourself to do in those moments that stopped you from waiting for permission to actually speaking what you really, really thought?
I think, again, you're taught from such a young age not to interrupt, right? But you get a business meeting, and the only way to contribute half the time is you have to interject at some point. So you have to find your moment. And there were so many times where I felt, in the lead up to sort of feeling like I'd cracked this, where I felt like, okay, I have something valuable and I think I can add to this conversation. And then in an attempt to posit it in the right moment, I would miss the boat, because by the time there was an opportunity to speak, the conversation had moved on. And it seems so silly. But it was really, for me personally, it was just ingrained in me that, and I think it happens with lots of women, right? We're taught that we are supposed to abide by this set of rules that actually doesn't really apply in the working world that well. And, I think maybe that's why women do so well at school and then kind of come out into the workforce and there's a bit of a jarring experience. But I think, watching the dynamics in a room and saying to myself, this is the conversation that I care about, because I think when I care about something, I'm better at articulating my view. I feel more passionate about interjecting my view. So finding something I really care about, finding something that I feel, and I genuinely don't feel the need to interject in a conversation if I have nothing substantive to add. If I don't have a different perspective. But frequently in boards where you kind of are the only woman or one of very few women, or you're in a slightly different role. So I'm in an operations role. So I'm not presenting financials. I'm not presenting the next possible acquisition and deal flow. But finding something I'm passionate about, and then just kind of saying, this needs to be said. Like, this conversation can't go on because we're missing a critical component of it as a board to be able to make a decision. I think having the confidence to realize that your point of view is a really important balance to a conversation is part of it as well. And that probably comes with just time. But I had a CEO who said to me at one point, when you speak about the things that you're passionate about, you are a completely different speaker than when you're just presenting words on a page. And I guess that's probably true of all of us, but I think it really hit home that makes a big difference for me. Yeah.
Did that impact your preparation for those meetings then, Lee?
Yeah, it did. I think even when putting together my kind of board pack sections, rather than necessarily give people what they'd seen before, making a bit more of a judgment call on what I felt was an important aspect to pull out or focus on.
Yeah. I love that point you're making about speaking about the things that we fundamentally care about. And then you get into it, you can feel it, can't you? You can actually feel it's a it's tangible as a feeling, I think, when you are talking about something, not just to you, but also to others. So like, the CEO's feedback to you saying, actually, it's very different when you speak from something that really matters to you. And I agree. I think we're all going so fast sometimes that we're tipping up to meetings, to say nothing of the sort of the back-to-back tyranny that most people seem to be dealing with at the moment, that actually that opportunity to stop and pause and think, what do I fundamentally care about in this meeting that I really want to wholeheartedly put my voice behind?
And COVID was so hard because we were all these boxes on screens, because I think when you care about something, your body language changes too. Like if you're in a room all together, you're leaning forward, you're sitting up straighter, and it's easier for other people to pick up on those cues too, so that they're ready for interjection when it comes. Whereas COVID was really, I think if my memory serves, yes, my first board appointment was December 2019. And then of course, later I think we had one board meeting. It was right after we raised private equity funding. We had one board meeting with our private equity backers in person before it went remote for 2 years or whatever it was. So that was also, I think, compounding the challenge for me, because it's a lot harder when you're just one little box on a screen of 12 or 9 or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a whole other skill in a way, isn't it?
Totally.
You've got a third of yourself to radiate some sort of energy and care, and influence people's opinions, right? Tougher. It's so interesting to hear Lee share how her inner dialogue of waiting for permission to speak was usefully dulled when she heard the phrase, "It's your obligation to dissent." That, coupled with her boss's feedback that you're a different speaker when you're talking about something you care about, Lee, gave her permission to choose. She chooses an approach of, this is the conversation I care about, because when I care about something, I feel more passionate about interjecting and articulating my view in a way that impacts others. That approach gives her the freedom to recognise those "this needs to be said" moments. When we talk from a place that we care about, it has a double energetic impact. Most importantly, on you first, and then any others who are listening will feel it. I want to emphasise this word, feel. It's a very useful way of preparing the energetic impact that you want to have on others. Most of us, particularly in high-pressure situations, focus on what we want people to know, the information we want to share in order for us to feel credible. And yes, this is important, but when we take time to reflect on what we want others to feel, it greatly impacts not only how we articulate it, but also how others receive it. The only permission we need when we want to speak is from ourselves. And whether it's to dissent or to ignite, here are 3 questions worth asking ourselves, and in this order. Firstly, what do I want them to do? For instance, postpone a decision. Secondly, what do I want them to feel? In this case, feel intrigued by a different perspective. Because by intriguing them rather than merely informing, we place our energy and focus on them rather than on ourselves. And finally, what do I want them to know? Having established what I want them to do and how I want them to feel, now I can arrange my content in the way that is most likely to intrigue them. Do, feel, know, in that order. The answers to question 1 and 2 enable us to edit and hone our answer to the third question, what we want them to know. And what I found invaluable about these questions is that they are useful both in the moment and if I have a lot longer to prepare for something. Reflecting particularly on what I want people to feel allows me to connect to that feeling, and consequently it impacts the way I say it, my body, my tone and the words I choose. This is what Lee's boss was referring to. He felt a difference in how she spoke through her feeling a connection to what she cared about. I love this, Pat, that you want to, you're driven by being a female role model, leader for others, working mum. So your whole life is entwined with what you stand for, I'm hearing here, as opposed to keeping things separate. You are representing a working mum as well as a successful working woman, as a leader. So my sense is that you've joined up quite a lot of the components, whereas maybe somebody else might keep them separate. Can you talk a bit more about what that means to you and how that allows you to manage the various different pressures along the way.
I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. It's super important to me for people to share their stories. I think it's, in this, social media world that we live in, where everybody is this plastic version of themselves that has no problems and no cares in the world and everything's great. I think it's so important in life, as it is in business, to demonstrate that, you're not perfect. You've got, 3 kids, you've got a husband, there is a lot going on. And I think I didn't find earlier in my career a lot of female role models that were people that I could identify with, because they were unidentifiable. They weren't, I didn't have visibility. Maybe it was because I just didn't have visibility on it, but I didn't see them as real, authentic people who were works in progress and who had messy lives, because all of us have messy lives, right? All of us do. None of us have a life that is just perfect, that everything goes smoothly all the time. And I think the only way you can demonstrate to younger women who are coming up in their careers and thinking about how in the world they are ever going to and young men to that as men, I think, have more opportunity for parental leave and more opportunity from business to be more active parents to their children. It is even more important that we demonstrate that it is doable. But my God, there are days when it is so hard, and there are pressures all over the map. There's pressures from the school moms, the exams in this country, and there's pressures. You can't walk a step, without facing, 1,000 different pressures. But the only way that we can keep parents in the workforce is by kind of showing them that, yeah, there are these pressures all over the place and they don't go away. They're a fact of life. We need to teach our kids how to deal with them. We need to teach each other how to deal with them. We need to acknowledge that they're there. And the only way to do that is kind of to be authentic and kind of show people that there's more than this work version of you.
Yeah. And as a leader, when you do that, what do you see is the impact with your team or others that you're working alongside?
I think it allows you to have stronger connections with people and allows you to be a bit more authentic at work, which I think not only helps the people you work directly with or kind of more junior members of staff, but also, I mean, I'm at a new firm. I've only been there for 3 weeks, right? And I've already had to kind of show up late to a meeting because my youngest, who just started commuting on his own, got stuck at a station because the train stopped running, and I had to head over to him to try and get him in an Uber and then make it to a meeting. To work with me is to know that I'm the deputy parent. My husband works on a trading floor. For all the will in the world, he can't, and he works a lot further away from our kids physically. He can't pick this stuff up. And the way our careers have gone, because I've taken breaks, it just doesn't work that way. So, I kind of come with a bit of a package deal. Yeah.
I'm hearing that. How would you, if the premise of this podcast, as you know, is around how do we take the energy of pressure and turn it into something that is enlivening and motivating, helps us grow, helps us become better. You're sharing a lot about how that has worked for you, Lee, and presumably it's going to still develop, right? How do you help others in your team who you can visibly see are under pressure? How do you lead others when they are facing, or they're even seeing pressure that you wouldn't necessarily feel is a pressure situation? We all have a different barometer, don't we, in terms of what is challenging or what is pressure making. How do you manage that as a leader?
I think you have to get to the bottom of what's causing it, right? Is there something at home, that's causing it? Is it something at work? Is it, is a workload issue? Is it a relationship at work? Is it a difficult client? Is it, what is it? And I think the only way that you're going to be able to unearth that is by having a good, strong connection with that person to begin with. And to be absolutely crystal clear in your purpose, which is to help them, help remove those obstacles, help give them the tools that they need. So whether it's, facing up to having a difficult conversation with a colleague, or whether it's, I don't know, helping them practice for a presentation that they have upcoming, they're, moderating a panel discussion for the first time, or, talking them through a difficult diagnosis, and making sure they have the support of the organization to take the time that they need, or to be flexible in their working pattern for a while to be able to address whatever it is they need to address. But I don't think you can do any of that unless you have a really good personal connection with that person, and B, that they know that without a doubt you are there to help them get through whatever it is they're getting through, and to get to the other side of it and be stronger and better and more capable as a consequence of that obstacle they've overcome.
Yeah. And do you have ways of discovering that, or is that just on intuition and what you notice?
I mean, I think you need to call things out I think not being afraid to call things out when you see behavior that's anachronistic to what you're used to seeing. If you see somebody that, I don't know, even looks down at their desk, as you pass by, maybe grabbing them when they're in the kitchen, making coffee and saying, hey, you don't look like your usual self. Is everything all right? Do you want to have a chat? Or, that deck that you sent, didn't have your usual energy, and you didn't get straight to the point in the way that I think you usually do. Is there something going on? Is there any way I can help? I mean, I think not shying away from kind of a potentially difficult conversation, opening the door to the, and not everybody wants to walk through that door, and that's okay. I think you've got to circle back on that later. But I think for me, because I am kind of very much an observer of people, I pick up pretty quickly when I think things are if things are changing, things are a little different. And I try and understand why that is.
So I'm hearing you make time for that. And there's this sort of social interactions that you're witnessing. Are there things that you actually purposely do in meetings to enable people to be able to share how they are, who they are, where they are today? Is there anything that you put into, I suppose I'm talking about the distance between formal and the informal connection.
For sure. I think meetings, or even when people are standing around having conversations, I think interpersonal kind of dynamics in space is fascinating, and how the interplay is with that, and people's ability to kind of put their best foot forward in terms of a conversation. I remember attending a meeting early days when I joined a firm a number of years ago, and I pointed out to the CEO that the conference room table, which is a long conference room table, it was like a Friday morning meeting, kind of all hands meeting. Everyone that was seated at the table were the men in the firm, and the women were kind of in the second. No, there wasn't a rule, no. And the women were sat, and there weren't that many women at the firm, and they were attempting to improve their kind of female representation. The women were kind of sat in a second row. And I pointed it out to him, and he was so floored that had happened kind of under his watch, given that it was something that he cared so much about. And that kind of stuff matters, right? It might happen by happenstance, but it matters. And you need to call it out, and you need to try and fix it, because you don't want to perpetuate that dynamic. And, even the way people are sat in meetings, or if one person comes to a meeting and doesn't talk at all and it's a small meeting, I will usually say to that person afterwards, you were in the meeting, but I didn't hear you say anything. Did you have something you wanted to add? Or I'll say it in the moment if I know them well enough and I know that that's not going to, put them on the spot and not bring out the best in them. And sometimes, people have perfectly reasonable explanations for not participating in meetings. But usually, when I would speak to our grads, when they would come in kind of once a year, I would say, if you have been invited to a meeting, it's because your opinion is wanted. So you've not been invited as an observer. You've been invited as an active participant. So use that.
Yeah. That sounds like the mantra you started to use yourself when you were first joining the board meeting, hey?
Yeah, the advice I wish I'd received.
Isn't that always the case, though? I want to just talk a little bit more about that, the idea of purpose and how that fuels you, Lee. Because I think that's the biggest thing that I've really taken from our work together is how much that really matters to you. And I'm intrigued to know what do you want to do with that? What's the ambition with your purpose or your sort of legacy, and how does pressure enable that to really excel for you? Because you're always, I think, wanting to go to the next phase, with things that really, really matter. And now with this new job, this fresh start, this sort of new energy, what's your relationship with pressure in terms of your own ambition?
It's a good question. I think I am not at all competitive. On the contrary, I captained sports in high school, and my primary objective with the team was that they all come together and get along and perform as a team. To me, that was so much more important than them winning. And I don't think anything's changed in that respect, right? For me, in order for an organization to perform, the people have to work together, and each one of the individuals has to be performing at their best in order for the team to perform at their best. For me, the pressure to make sure I'm fostering that to the greatest extent possible comes from within. Yes, of course, I feel external pressures, but I think I have far more kind of exceedingly high expectations on myself than probably others typically do. And I think, part of that not wanting to let people down, that pressure drives me to have high expectations. And I think, some of the quid pro quo of me having, the package deal of, the three kids who are still kind of, Mom, I need more money. Mom, I did, with no acknowledgement whatsoever that there's a work day and hours and that I might be on calls despite repeated reminders, I think is that I will put in 110% effort into everything I do. I may have to leave because my son gets stuck at some, tube station. But I will also put in work till 2:00 in the morning to make sure I have absolutely the best, output on whatever I'm working on, or that I get through that stuff that I wanted to get done for the day. So for me, the flexibility that I am given as a working mom comes back in spades in terms of my loyalty to the organization and the I guess level kind of that I hold myself to, in terms of how much I give to the organization and the quality of what I give to the organization. Yeah. So again, I think pressure, it's like all self-created pressure, which probably is also has lots of contributing effects of external pressure. But
yeah, and the red flag in all of that, as I listen to it, is when we have a desire to bring the best out of others. Often ourselves get left behind. So, I hear a very strong drive in you to do the best for as many people as possible in your watch, under your watch. How do you recover, Lee? How do you put Lee at the heart of her own recovery and looking after her in order to be able to be there in that way for others?
I mean, I think there's a number of different things. I mean, I try and walk a lot. I try and always figure out how to get at least 20 minutes or 30 minutes of walking. I mean, and we're so lucky to live in London and everything, walking through some beautiful neighborhoods, parks, whatever. Either I'll walk to the train station on this end at home, or I'll walk, from my son's school to the office. I always am listening to a podcast. Sometimes it's kind of asset management, investment management, kind of really heavy duty kind of technical stuff. And sometimes it's leadership. And, there's an organizational psychologist from Wharton Business School that I listen to all the time that I love, because he's always thinking about how people, like what makes people tick and how they are successful, how who they are contributes to making them successful. Or, I mean, even, podcast about talking to teens, so I listen to a whole host of different things. And I listen to podcasts pretty much anytime, as soon as I leave the office, my AirPods go in and I'm listening to something and I'm walking. And I need that time to be in my head, in my own head, and like process stuff. And there's lots of times that, I'll stop in the middle of a walk and send a text or send an email because something will occur to me that I need to do, and that somebody I need to reach out to, or I don't know, something I need to move forward. But also, I've always, Saturday and Sunday, I always do my Pilates classes. My physical health, my back's lousy and it keeps me kind of more or less upright. But I think, I try and cobble together that stuff that I do for myself during the week. And then on the weekend, I make sure I do my Pilates classes, and then, I surround myself with the people that are going to bring out the best in me, right? Like my friends and my colleagues, former and present, who are going to challenge me and, tell me I'm off base when I'm off base. And I talk to my parents all the time. I talk to my in-laws all the time. My husband's like a huge champion and is, always a good honesty meter.
Yes.
So, lots of different ways, I think, but I think you have to figure out when you are working and you have children and you have aging parents and whatever, you have to grab every opportunity, right? So if it's on your commute, you make the best of your commute, right? If it's for 1 hour on a Saturday, you make the best of that time. You've got to be really efficient about it.
Yeah.
This conversation with Lee reminds me of the distinction between buffaloes and cows and their response to a storm. When cows sense a storm, they run away from it in the hope of avoiding it, and as a consequence, they maximise the pain and frustration and become exhausted and remain in the storm longer. On the other hand, when buffaloes sense a storm, they run directly into it to get through it and out the other side quickly, minimising the duration of the impact by hitting it head on. By heading into the storm, they are being efficient with their energy. It reminds me of learning to surf and realising that the only way I could get to the other side of a large wave rolling towards me was to head straight through it, to avoid it throwing me head over heels towards the shore. It felt, and it still feels actually, entirely counterintuitive to do this. But the impact and sense of control, and frankly surprise, that it provides when I'm on the other side of it is enlivening. And as I think back, I'm reminded of the importance of both the timing and commitment needed to successfully get through a large wave. If I hesitate or mistime it, I'm done for. We all have pressure or storms in our life. In fact, Lee talks about thousands of pressures, societal, personal, professional, coming at us on a daily basis. If we make sure that we have enough fuel in our tank, really take our shed seriously, we can be better at choosing when and if to respond. And when we have ways to connect to why it matters, boosting our purpose energy, we can power up our commitment to run towards it, accessing our buffalo energy when we need it most. That way we become more and more efficient at choosing to use our energy where it matters most. I always finish with 2 questions from guests around, if you had 2 things that you could offer anyone listening to this who wants to be better under pressure and turn the energy of pressure into a force for better, what would be your 2 pay forwards to them?
I think the first one is that one that I mentioned about guilt. If you can identify when you're doing something that's been spurred on by a feeling of guilt versus any other stimulus, maybe stop and take note of that and try and understand who you're doing it for. Are you doing something for yourself? Or are you doing something out of a feeling, feeling badly for not having done something for someone else, or feeling badly for not having done something differently? And I think tied into that is, I try and learn from my mistakes, but I'm not a look in the rearview mirror person very much. I look in the rearview mirror from the standpoint of, I want to learn, and I want to use the amazing experiences I've had to be able to move forward. But I do not do the what if I'd taken a different decision? What if I'd taken a different path? And I think for me, those are kind of 2 really important aspects of trying to kind of be positive and use pressure for good. Because you can't rewrite the past, right? And
No, but I'm hearing when you do look back, you are learning and you're gathering the things that are actually very useful to you. Do you do that? Is that a conscious effort? And do you literally sit down and think, what have I done in the last year that I'm going to really take forward, or what am I learning from? How do you do that? Is it an unconscious, or is it quite a conscious process for you when you look back in the rearview mirror for lessons?
The idea of having a moment to sit down and think is hilarious. Does anybody have time for that? No, I think it's subconscious. It's not that it's subconscious, because I know that when I walk and either if I'm really chewing on something, I'll walk, and I know that's how I'm going to be processing information, or I'm talking to somebody like you, or a friend or whomever who can help me kind of untangle something. But I am a thinker, I am a talker. So if something's bothering me, I don't hold it and bottle it up and hold it inside. I try to work through it. I can't not work through it. So I don't have one of those amazing Pandora's boxes that I can chuck everything in. It just doesn't work for me. It kind of seeps out. So yeah. I know I need to figure it out somehow. But I think maybe it was conscious at one point, but I think it's just part of how I operate.
Yeah, and what's wonderful, I think, about what you're saying is, some of us will look back and say, what if, and if only I had, and, if I'd taken that direction instead of, what you're saying is that's not what you do. You've made a decision. It's a choice. You've now moved forward. There's no point in wasting any energy on looking back at that and chastising yourself around that decision. But what you do is you do pick up the key lessons that you've learned along the way and take them with you into where you're heading. Either you don't sit down and actively do that, but it sounds like that you are doing that unconsciously. You're collecting, like a magpie, some of the things along the way that are going to be useful for you going forward. Is that roughly it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I've moved from company to company and had breaks and taken roles when I've come back that probably I wouldn't have ever considered taking, if I'd had a kind of linear career. I think, there are times when I felt like I've had jobs, and there are times when those jobs have morphed into careers, and there are times when I've had a career. And I think, you could look back on that and go, oh, did I waste, a couple of years of my life doing a job? No, because they're all stepping stones, right? Like if I hadn't done that job, I wouldn't have learned this, or I wouldn't have met this person. I wouldn't have, worked in this amazing place during, this insane time or whatever it was, going on in the markets. I think everything, we're all on a path, right? And I think every stepping stone that we go kind of past has some value. We just have to figure out what the value is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. There's a nugget of gold in every experience if we look for it.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Lee, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. Our aim is to share as many examples as possible of what people do to manage pressure for better. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.